Gather close, for history remembers what the world has forgotten. In the year 911, Europe was bleeding. For over a century, the great rivers of Francia had become highways of terror, carrying dragon-proud ships deep into the heart of Christian lands. The Carolingian Empire, once mighty under Charlemagne, was crumbling like ancient parchment. But among all the Viking warlords who had carved their names in blood across Europe, one stood apart. His name was Hrolf, though history would remember him as Rollo. And in that pivotal year of 911, this Northman would make a deal that would reshape the medieval world forever.
Wait, one Viking changed everything?
One Viking and one desperate king. But to understand how a Norse raider became the first Duke of Normandy, we must first witness the world he was born to conquer. Rollo emerged from the fjords of Norway sometime in the 860s, when the Viking Age was reaching its terrible crescendo. The exact details of his birth are lost to time, but the chronicles agree on one thing: he was a giant among men. The Icelandic sagas called him Gongu Hrolfr, Hrolf the Walker, because no horse could carry his enormous frame. Like countless young Norsemen, Rollo was raised on stories of distant lands rich with silver and poorly defended by soft southern warriors. The great raids of the previous generation had opened every coastline to Viking axes and ambition.
So he grew up basically planning to raid.
Raiding wasn't just what Vikings did. It was their economy, their politics, their path to glory. By the 880s, young Rollo had gathered his own warband and set his sights on the richest prize in Western Europe, Francia. To understand Rollo's opportunity, picture Francia in the late 9th century. Rich monasteries dotted the landscape like jewel boxes, filled with centuries of accumulated wealth. The Frankish nobility lived in luxury their grandfathers had earned through conquest. But the empire was fracturing. After the death of Charles the Fat in 888, the kingdom had splintered into competing factions. Local lords fortified their own territories while the central authority crumbled like sand. Into this chaos came the Northmen, wave after wave of them. They had learned that Francia's rivers, the Seine, the Loire, the Rhône, were highways leading directly to undefended wealth.
Hold on. They could just sail right up to attack anywhere.
Precisely. The Franks had built their civilization around rivers for trade, never imagining those same waterways would deliver their doom. By the time young Rollo began his career, entire regions had been abandoned to the raiders. Rollo's first raids along the Frankish coast were typical Viking affairs, swift, brutal, and profitable. But the young giant had larger ambitions than quick raids and hasty retreats. Unlike many raiders who struck and fled, Rollo began establishing winter camps, studying Frankish defenses, learning the language of his enemies. He was transforming from raider to strategist. His warband grew as success followed success. More importantly, he began attracting not just Norwegian followers, but Danes, Swedes, even dispossessed Franks who saw opportunity in chaos.
Wait, Franks joined him?
When your own lords can't protect you, you join whoever can. Rollo was already learning the lesson that would make him a duke. Power flows to those who can provide security. In 885, Rollo joined the most ambitious Viking assault ever attempted, the Siege of Paris. 700 ships and 30,000 warriors converged on the island city that controlled passage up the Seine. But Paris held firm under Count Odo, and for the first time, Rollo witnessed organized Frankish resistance that actually worked. The siege lasted months, and while the Vikings eventually extracted tribute, they had learned a crucial lesson. Standing before those walls, Rollo saw the future. Raiding was profitable, but ruling was power. The Franks who held castles commanded respect. Those who merely raided were just expensive problems to be paid off.
So the siege failed, but gave him ideas.
The siege taught him that taking land temporarily meant nothing. Holding it permanently, that was everything. By 900, Rollo had become one of the most feared Viking commanders in Francia. He controlled the lower Seine Valley like a king, extracting tribute from merchant vessels and terrorizing the Frankish countryside at will. His headquarters became a permanent settlement, Vikings bringing wives, children, livestock. These weren't raiders anymore. They were colonists with weapons. The reports reaching the Frankish court grew more alarming each year. Rollo wasn't just raiding. He was building a state within a state, and his power grew with each passing season. More disturbing still, local Franks were beginning to see Rollo's rule as preferable to the chaos and taxation of their own lords.
He was basically becoming a king.
He was becoming something more dangerous than a king, a successful alternative to royal authority. And that's when King Charles the Simple realized he faced an impossible choice. By 910, Charles the Simple was living up to his name in the worst possible way. His armies couldn't defeat Rollo in the field. His treasury couldn't afford to pay the tribute demands. His nobles were beginning to whisper about replacement. Desperate messages flew between the royal court and Rollo's stronghold. What if, the king's negotiators suggested, there was another way? The idea was radical, revolutionary, even heretical to traditional Frankish thinking. What if they gave Rollo what he already held, but transformed him from enemy into ally?
They wanted to just give him the land?
They wanted to transform a problem into a solution. If Rollo became a legitimate Frankish duke, bound by oath to defend his lands, he would have to fight other Vikings instead of joining them. The meeting was arranged for autumn 911 on the banks of the Seine near the village of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte. It was less negotiation than mutual recognition of reality. Charles came with the authority of Charlemagne's crown, but the weakness of a failing dynasty. Rollo came with 30 years of Viking victories and the loyalty of warriors who had never known defeat. The terms, when they emerged, were staggering in their implications. Rollo would receive the county of Rouen and all lands between the Epte and Bresla rivers. In return, he would convert to Christianity, marry a Frankish princess, and defend his new duchy against all enemies, especially other Vikings.
Hang on. He had to become Christian and marry a princess.
The marriage sealed the deal politically, but the conversion, that was the price of legitimacy in Christian Europe. The formal ceremony took place on a crisp October morning in 911. The ritual would transform Europe, though few realized it at the time. As the two leaders faced each other, the contrast was striking. Charles represented old imperial authority. Rollo embodied new martial reality. The oath itself was standard feudal language, protection in return for loyalty. But when Rollo spoke the ancient formula, he was creating something unprecedented, a Viking duchy within Francia. The chronicles record that when tradition demanded Rollo kiss the king's foot, he refused to kneel, instead ordering one of his men to do it, who lifted the king clear off the ground in the process. Even in submission, the Vikings would not be humiliated.
Oh my God, they actually lifted the king up.
A perfect symbol of the new reality, the forms of Frankish authority preserved, but Viking strength underneath. Rollo's baptism took place weeks later in Rouen Cathedral, the spiritual heart of his new duchy. For a man who had spent his life raiding Christian churches, the symbolism was profound. He took the Christian name Robert, honoring the powerful Robertian dynasty. His marriage to Princess Gisla completed his transformation from foreign raider to Frankish nobleman. But transformation cuts both ways. The Vikings who followed him into legitimacy faced their own identity crisis.
What did his men think about all this?
Some embraced it as the path to permanent wealth and security. Others drifted away to find leaders who still promised traditional raiding. But those who stayed would become the founding families of Normandy. The newly minted Duke Robert faced immediate challenges that would have broken a lesser man. Other Viking raiders saw his lands as traitorous and ripe for plunder. The first major test came within months, when a Danish fleet sailed up the Seine expecting the usual tribute. Instead, they found their former ally had become their fiercest enemy. The victory established Rollo's credibility with his Frankish subjects. For the first time in generations, the Seine Valley knew security from Viking raids. But military success was only the beginning. Creating a functioning state from a Viking warband required skills no raider had ever needed.
So he had to learn to actually govern?
He had to invent a completely new form of governance, Viking military democracy mixed with Frankish feudalism, seasoned with pragmatic innovation. Within a generation, something unprecedented was emerging in Rollo's duchy. The settlers were creating a hybrid culture that drew strength from both traditions. The military system Rollo developed would eventually conquer England and Sicily. He took Viking martial spirit and Frankish mounted combat, creating something more effective than either alone. Trade flourished under stable rule. The same rivers that had carried Viking raiders now bore merchant vessels to peaceful markets. The Christian conversion, initially political, gradually became cultural transformation. Rollo's descendants would become some of medieval Europe's most devout rulers.
They really changed that completely.
Within 50 years, these Vikings had become more French than the Franks, and then they used that strength to conquer half of Europe. When Rollo died around 930, he left behind more than a duchy. He had created a new model for European politics, the successful integration of barbarian military power with Christian civilization. His great-great-grandson William would carry Norman ambitions across the English Channel in 1066. The Battle of Hastings was, in many ways, the ultimate vindication of Rollo's bargain with Charles the Simple. Norman knights would lead the First Crusade. Norman adventurers would carve kingdoms from Sicily to Antioch. All of it flowed from that treaty signed on the banks of the Seine in 911.
All of that came from one deal?
One deal that recognized a simple truth. Sometimes the best way to defeat your enemies is to make them your allies. The story of Rollo challenges our assumptions about medieval politics and cultural change. Here was successful integration centuries before anyone had coined the term. Standing in modern Rouen, you can still see the world Rollo built. The tourist brochures call him the founder of Normandy, but he was something more, proof that civilizations grow strongest at their meeting points. Modern genetic studies confirm what the chronicles suggested. The Norman fusion was real, biological as well as cultural. The descendants of both Vikings and Franks still live in the land Rollo unified.
People today are actually descended from his followers.
From Dublin to Jerusalem, from London to Palermo, millions trace their ancestry to that moment when a Viking giant knelt before a Frankish king and changed the course of history. The rise of Rollo reminds us that history's greatest transformations often come not from conquest alone, but from the courage to become something new. In the end, Rollo's true victory wasn't military, it was cultural. He proved that Vikings could become more than raiders, that Franks could adapt to change, and that Europe's future lay not in rigid tradition, but in creative synthesis. The birth of the Normans began with one man's willingness to trade the freedom of the sea for the responsibility of the crown. Our story ends here, but the echoes of the past continue. Your voice guides where we travel next. Leave a comment with the events or figures you'd like to explore, and subscribe to join this growing fellowship of medieval storytellers.